Hello, hello. Yes, Ted, it's starting now. In fact, I better turn the volume down so I can't hear myself. If there's anything specific, I'm going to write it in the box here. Specific I can help with, just ask away and I will help. Well, I say it's starting now, Ted. You've got about 4 minutes until 8 o'clock. You were straight out of the blocks there, though, weren't you? I'll get cracking at 8. 3 minutes. Nobody asks me out. I'll go watch telly. If you do ask me something though, you might get some hints on where to focus your revision tomorrow and what to do to get the best marks. In the meantime, I'll go on my iPad. So yeah, just type a question in the box. If there's anything specific you want me to go over, anything that you're not sure about. And that's where I'll crack on. Logged on a little bit early just to make sure it's all working. So you just type in the box. 2 minutes to go. Not had any questions yet. I think there's a bit of a delay on the comments box. But I need something there. Hello, Katie. Think you're... Oh no, that's right, yeah. So, in here, Bob, if you've got a question, something you want to go over, just say, sir, not sure about this, or sir, not sure about that. Remember on Parents' Evening I gave you a breakdown of all of the specification of the things that you need to be aware of. So you might want to get that in front of you and look through and go, not sure about that one, sir, can you go over that? Okay, we've hit 8 o'clock just about. There we go. House of Cliff. Guessing that's Sam. So there's a starting point. Right then. So, William's relationship with his sons. Okay, well, it's significant if you're looking at the succession crisis of 1088 instead of the succession crisis of 1066. Because when William died, he kind of had the opposite problem to Edward. And it might be, in my mind, probably, I would say, and in my exam I would say definitely, because you've always got to sound sure in a history exam, remember that. I'd say the biggest reason for a succession crisis was the fact that William had 3 ambitious sons, and coupled with that, very closely linked to my second paragraph would be particularly his relationship with Robert, his eldest son, which broke down. Because if if William had only one son, then there wouldn't have really been a succession crisis that one son would have inherited. Maybe if William had the 3 sons he did have, but hadn't fallen out with his eldest son. Maybe his eldest son Robert would have inherited everything. So his relationship with his eldest son broke down because Robert was impatient. He saw that William was an absentee monarch. So he was King of England, Duke of Normandy, both at the same time. And Robert's got impatient and thinking, well, I should take over ruling part of this for my dad. And he was sort of making it clear that that's what he wanted to do. His dad wasn't giving him that opportunity. His dad's not the sort of guy to just give away power. He was like, no, you wait till I'm dead, and then you might be able to inherit. And then, of course, there was the incident which everybody remembers because it's so unusual, when Henry and William Rufus, Robert's 2 younger brothers, peed on his head at a party. And Robert absolutely lost the plot, furious, went to try and fight his brothers. It got split up. He stormed out of there. And there was sort of a division between the old guard, the older generation of Normans who'd been with William, and their sons who went with Robert. So it's like dads versus sons, if you like, in many ways. And Robert went to the King of France, because the King of France and William didn't have the best of relationships at this point. And the King of France gave Robert a castle just on the Norman-French border, from where Robert could have a base to basically raid into Normandy and annoy his dad, but also somewhere to stay protected. Anyhow, it all came to a head at the Battle of Gerberai, which may or may not be the right way to say it. I've no idea. It's a French word. And at the Battle of Gerberai, Robert won. So you hear all the time of William being this fantastic general who carried on beating the rebels over and over and over again, winning at the Battle of Hastings and just being generally brilliant. Maybe he'd lost his touch a little bit because his son managed to beat him in battle there. In fact, there's also a story that William was very nearly killed in that battle, but was saved by a Saxon thane. So that shows you, over in France, there's some English people going along to fight on the behalf of William by this point. I can't remember the exact date of the battle, so I'm just going to Google that for you. But it would have been later in William's reign, because, yeah, it's showing how much William had managed to take over the country. It's only telling us about, there we go, 1078-79, so it's 3-4 years after the rebellion of the Earls. And you've just asked me about the rebellion of Earls, actually. I've seen in the comments box. Well, both the rebellion of the Earls in 1075 and the Battle of Gerberai show how much William had managed to take control of the country, because in both cases, Saxons were fighting on William's side. So yeah, and then after the Battle of Gerberai, William was not willing to give in. He was like angry. He'd lost the battle. He's not used to losing battles. He'd lost against his upstart son who was trying to take him on. He was trying to carry on the battle, but his earls were sort of the calming influence. Said, "Look, this is we're not happy about this. We're having to fight battles. They're dangerous battles against our sons, who we want to inherit our lands and our power. We're not wanting to fight our sons. William, we don't want any more of this." So, although they didn't outright say, "We're not doing what you say, William," they put that pressure on, and William decided to sue for peace. And what did Robert want? He wanted to be named William's heir. William agreed and named Robert his heir, but he didn't seem to say specifically what that meant. So later on, when he died, he made Robert his heir in Normandy, but didn't specify England. So there you have it. Pie face 1, 2, 3. No, your exam is in a classroom. Thanks, Katie, for pointing that one out. Thrill Mania. Who won World War II? The Allies. Thanks again, Katie. Being very useful here. And that's not on the assessment. So, where were we, Katie? What happened in the Revolt of the Earls and why? Okay. There were 2 Earls. And they were Norman Earls, or at least they came from the descendant. They were descendants, the sons of of Norman Earls. And I'm just going to get it in my textbook. Got it on here. So we've got it all in front of us. Anyhow, one of those earls wanted to marry the daughter of one of the other earls. So it's like the second generation coming through. And William wasn't willing to allow that to happen. So they were a bit fed up with that. So it's 1075, and yeah, he didn't want the marriage to get these two powerful earls together, but they did it anyway. So that, oh, forget it, we're going to marry anyway. Don't matter what you say, William. William was in Normandy at the time, and it was at the wedding feast, supposedly, where this plan was hatched. And so there was, it was the sister, should I say, of Roger. So Roger, Earl of Hereford, whose dad had been William Fitzosborne, a very powerful nobleman, and one of William's greatest sort of nobles, greatest allies in the invasion of England. Roger was also a little bit resentful that he didn't have as much power as his dad had, but his sister he wants to marry to Ralph, Earl of Norfolk. And there's somebody at this wedding who ends up being sort of brought into the plan, and that's Waltheof, Earl of Northumbria, and he's a Saxon. Anyway, I just imagine, I don't know, this is just, you're at a wedding, he's had a few drinks, the celebration's going on, and Roger and Ralph sit either side of him and say, Waltheof, you're not happy about this invasion, are you? You're not happy about what's happened, and all the Norman imposition of rule, and Waltheof going, well, well, we've got an idea about a revolt. Anyway, Waltheof agrees to join in with this revolt, and then he must have had second thoughts, because after the wedding, and he goes off to confess to Lanfranc, Archbishop of Canterbury, who's acting as regent whilst William's over in Normandy. And what Lanfranc does is he arrests Waltheof, and sends word to William and prepares to resist. And so Bishop Odo and Lanfranc, they defeat this rebellion. William doesn't even leave Normandy. Shows the hold that he's got. Oh, Ebony, you're a week too early. Ebony, I'm going to do crime and punishment stuff next Sunday before the year 11 mocks the following week. So this is Anglo-Saxon and Norman stuff, because that's what year 10 have got their mock exam on. It's a good job you asked that, because there might be some other year 11s who've tuned in here. Jack, you do lose marks for incorrect spelling to a point. So if you have got tons of spelling mistakes, you're going to lose. If you've got one or two, you probably won't lose any marks at all. So yeah, it has some impact. Anyway, that's why, Ebony. Yeah, so tune in this time next week. I'll do about some crime and punishment stuff for the year 11 exam. So yeah, Waltheof tells about the plan. Lanfranc and Bishop Odo deal with the rebellion with English forces, with Saxon forces, so it shows how much control William has of the country. They march their armies up the middle to divide Roger and Ralph, and they defeat them. So, and also Roger and Ralph had asked for the Danes to come over and join in. You know that happened before. The Danes did arrive, but all they did was pillage York and go home again. Basically did what they'd done before. They weren't interested in fighting the Normans, because the Normans were particularly powerful and they had all these castles. They just came and stole some stuff, went back again. Now, Ralph was cornered by the Royal Army, and so he fled, went overseas, and all of them, he ended up leaving his men, the men that he'd managed to get into the rebellion. He actually left his wife behind to defend Norwich Castle. So he fled to Norwich, then went across the sea, left his wife in charge of the castle and all the men. The wife surrendered, but negotiated safe passage for herself. But any men who had been captured by William before the surrender had their eyes popped out and were mutilated. Waltheof, which seems particularly harsh, was executed. But he was the one who told. He sort of said, "Hey, look, I've said I'll get involved in this rebellion. This rebellion happened." He'd told of what was going on, and then he was executed. Roger was captured, and all his lands were taken. He was put in prison for the rest of his life, and he died in 1087. So that didn't go so well for the revolt of the Earls. Why? What? But this is the key bit here, Katie. It was different to any of the other rebellions because William, in pretty much every other rebellion, he went there and he dealt with it. The other rebellions mostly were from between 1066 and 1070-71. It's a bit of a gap to the revolt of the Earls. And so William didn't feel the need to go and deal with it himself, and it still got dealt with pretty effectively. And secondly, English people were fighting on William's side to defeat the rebels. So whereas before it was always English people fighting against them. Did Morcar die in prison? Morcar, yes, he did. Morcar died in prison. So Morcar was taken prisoner for joining in with Hereward the Wake in East Anglia in his rebellion on the Isle of Ely. And yeah, put in prison for the rest of his life. I think did he die? I'm pretty sure he died in prison. Anyway, that's where William put him, in prison. So those some bits already. Oh, and I've nearly missed one out there. The culture and language of the Norman aristocracy. Right, okay. So let's get to that bit. So first of all, England, as a result of the Norman conquest, the official language of government was to be French for around about the next 400 years. So that's a huge change for England. Let me see if I can get about the culture here. Obviously, there's the way that the country was set up, which is different. Or is it different, actually? So you've got the social system, if you're thinking about the customs of Normandy. And so before, you had king, earls. If you don't know this social system, it's a good thing to know. Anyway, you've got the king, the earls, the thanes, the churls, the peasant farmers and the slaves in Anglo-Saxon England. In Norman England, you've got the king, you've got his tenants-in-chief, which it's a bit confused this time. You could call them barons or earls. It's all mixed in. But if you just call them tenants-in-chief, the powerful people under the king, the knights, and the peasants. They got rid of slavery, did the Normans. And nobody owned land apart from William and the church. The church got to keep about 25% of land. William owned all land, which is why the people below him were called tenants-in-chief. Somebody rents a house from you, they're your tenant. So these people, they had the land so long as William allowed them to have the land. And he could remove it as and when he saw fit because it wasn't their land, it was his land. And so you might need to know a little bit about the different roles of the time. It'd be in your revision guides if you've got them, but basically everybody... Whose man is this? Villains, okay, I'll tell you. Yeah, oh, yes, good question. The villains, if you remember me saying, Jack, was the fancy word you would give for the peasants in the feudal system. Easiest ones to talk about, well, the tenants-in-chief were the major landowners who held their land directly from the king. When they died, when a tenant-in-chief died, it didn't automatically, the land didn't go to their son. They had to pay the king, usually, a tax. And actually, if you want the A-level word for it, I believe it was called a feudal incident, was the tax that they had to pay to inherit the land. And William could set, if this was an earl that had died and he gets on with his son, he could set that price low. Or if he was like, right, I want that land to give to one of my other supporters, he could set it so high he knew the son wouldn't be able to pay it. And then he could do it, because it's his land. All of the country under the feudal system is controlled by William. In return for the land, the tenants-in-chief had to provide knights for the king's army, or for the king's castles for 40 days a year. And so from all of the tenants-in-chief, for the land that he gave to them, the king could expect about 4,000 to 5,000 knights in any given year. And it meant you didn't have to pay them, so you don't have to pay for mercenaries because they owe it because of the land that they've got. The knights who got the land off the tenants-in-chief, well, in return for the land the knights got, so it divided down, obviously they had to provide 40 days service to the tenant-in-chief, and the tenant-in-chief will put the knights in charge of the different castles and that sort of thing. Well, we'll do a little bit more about the customs. I see another question there coming from Jack. And remember, all of this saves after I've said it, so if you need to go back and say anything again, then you can do. I know there's a really good page in the textbook which tells us about the different Norman customs. So I'm just trying to get it there. If you've got the textbook yourself, it's the one with the big picture on of all the Normans. Here we go. So, who was it who asked this? Yeah, our boy Edgar Mims, whoever that is, brilliant. The cultural language, so the language of course was French, although court proceedings were written down and recorded in Latin. So, nobles were expected to be generous to the knights who fought for them, gifting land, war horses, hunting dogs, showed that a nobleman was a good man to follow because he was honourable. So to get their loyalty, they played a lot of chess and dice and gambling. Children of noblemen were taught good manners, how to eat politely, the importance of being clean, hands and faces were washed regularly. They had jesters and minstrels singing and playing music as entertainment. 2 jesters are mentioned in the Doomsday Book because they were given land by their lords. They must have been funny. They spoke French. It was a sign of their superiority. Their children probably learned a little bit of English from servants, but spoke French for the important things. If you were important in England for about the next 400 years, you spoke French. They believed bravery, loyalty and honour were the most important qualities for a lord. They didn't write, though they couldn't write. They had their servants to do that for them. But many of them learnt to read so they could look at important documents for themselves. And hunting was their favourite pastime. So they were allowed to hunt. The forest laws allowed the nobles to hunt in the land that they were the tenant-in-chief of, but of course the poor people weren't allowed to do so because of the forest laws. So there we go. What changed to the government after the conquest? Right, okay, so the biggest change to the government was probably the 2 things that kind of go hand in hand. So before the Norman conquest, you've got 3 major earldoms, and that was dangerous for any king because those earldoms, at least 3 really powerful men, they held so much power the king had to get their approval to be able to do things because they held too much power, they had so much land. William wasn't having that, so he destroyed the old earldoms, divided up the land even further, and so there was never the case where there's just 3 ridiculously powerful earls. There were lots of barons and earls, tenants-in-chief as we call them. And before these earls, they had a lot of power. They controlled law and order in an area. Well, when the earls reduce in power, into that power vacuum to help him control the country, come the sheriffs or the shire reeves. And the shire reeves or sheriffs were very important as well because William spent a lot of time out of the country. So if you think of government, sometimes you think of people in Parliament, like now, like MPs, politicians. Government just means whoever governs the country. So, before the Norman conquest, King Edward the Confessor, he never left England really. He was always in England, always pretty much around London, as according to the evidence that we know. He was very rarely out of the country, or if ever out of the country. William was always out of the country. He was more often in Normandy than he was in England. So he was an absentee monarch. He was often not there. So he still had to rule. So he ruled by writ, which meant the chancellery was very important. So in there, people would be writing out these writs, which are basically instructions to send to the different corners of the country, so the sheriffs could get those instructions and make sure in their area law and order was carried out, and the taxes were paid that William said needed to be paid. So the reduction in the power of the earls and the increase in the power of the sheriffs, because of William being an absentee monarch, they'd be two of the biggest changes to government that I would be writing about. I'll come back to that. But the Domesday Book, you're right, Katie, it was the first big survey of England. So basically in 1085, so just 2 years before William died, he wanted to have a survey of the land. There you go, yeah boy, whoever you are. He wanted to make sure he could find out who he could tax and how much he could tax. Why at that time? Well, at that time he was particularly worried about the Danes invading, because they were sort of threatening that they were going to invade again. So he wanted to make sure he knew how much he had, so how much he could tax, for future reference, but also for if case the Danes invaded, so he knew how much money he would be able to have to be able to provision an army. That's the word I'm looking for. It was never quite finished, the Domesday Book, because William died. But it does tell us how incredibly powerful William was to have such a survey carried out in the first place with such accuracy. It shows us how ludicrously wealthy William was. And because of the Domesday Book, it meant his successors, so his son William Rufus, and then his other son Henry after him, had the power to tax people effectively because they knew how much income everyone had. What is the question for the mock? Right, Luke, you're asking a good question there. So, because you people, whoever you are tuned in, you're going to get a little bit of a hint here. And well done for being cheeky. If you don't ask, you don't get. So the questions on the mock exam that you need to concentrate on when I've finished here, I'm not going to tell you specifically the questions, but you want to focus on what happened after William died. So the course goes from 1060, I think, to 1088. William died in 1087. So what happened in 1087? What happened in 1088? The end of the revision guide, the end of the textbook. There's one big hint for you. And then the other big bit is what happened after 1066. So, it breaks into a couple of things. So if you've got a pen there, if you're jotting this down, why was William able to control England after Battle of Hastings? You might remember, and it's wrong on my Quizlet actually. I'm going to remember to change that now by loading up that Quizlet. Now it's occurred to me. William had 7,000 men to control 2 million English people. That seems like ludicrous odds. How did he do that? So you got to think, how did William control England? Also, how did England change? These are the two. They are pretty much the two areas, and you can think of how did it change in terms of the church. There's a big chunk on the church. How did it change in the economy, social structures. We've talked about the Norman aristocracy, castles, KTS. They were very important. Of course, you've got to think, if I'm writing about castles, what am I going to be able to write about castles? You might need to have some examples of some rebellions in which castles were effective. One off the top of my head, Exeter rebelled. I don't even know if this is in the textbook, but you can have it. Exeter rebelled soon after the Norman conquest, held out for a while. It was actually Harold Godwinson's mum who was in control of the rebellion in Exeter. You can probably Google the Exeter rebellion. William struggled to get into Exeter, but as soon as he did, he built a castle. Exeter never rebelled again. So, at least not under William. So there we go. What website are you using, sir? What do you mean, what website? Oh, I'm on my Kindle. So I've got the textbook on my Kindle. So if there's anything I'm not sure about, I'm just looking at the textbook. If you're thinking about websites for revising, though, get yourself on Quizlet. I've got an epic Anglo-Saxon and Norman Quizlet on there with all the things that you could need. So I've not gone back to Anglo-Saxon government. So whoever asked me about government, the power of the king increased Edward didn't own land outright. We did own some land outright. We didn't own the whole country outright. Whereas William says the whole country's mine. The church had a lot of power, of course. That's a good idea. Look, hold on. So, where are we? I'll find it here. Here is a massive epic Quizlet. So that should work for you. And I should edit the one that I said I was going to edit. Because I know it's 7,000 men to control 2 million. There we go, that's edited now, so that's correct. Yeah, well, it was also said in the English, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, written by the monks after the conquest, that England was actually safer after the Norman conquest, because William was not allowed to, not inclined to not have complete control. And we know about his harsh punishments. You know about the murder fine. If a Norman turns up dead, everybody's paying a really harsh fine, even if that means starvation for certain people. He decimated the north, the harrying of the north. People were afraid to take on William by the end. Or even by the end, after 1071. There was only the revolt of the Earls, and that was about it. So people were scared of taking on William because he had so much power, because his punishments were so harsh. So, yeah, he had the king, he had his advisors, that was similar to before. Maybe one of the big differences is, though, because William was an absentee monarch, he ruled with regents a lot of the time. Regent is a great word to use. A regent is somebody in control of a country on behalf of somebody else. Often that was Bishop Odo, sometimes it was William Fitz-Osborne, Osborne even, and sometimes Lanfranc. So yeah, he made sure his earls weren't too powerful, so there's a difference. The earls are less powerful under William, and the sheriff power increased. They had to follow the instructions received in the writs. They had to collect taxes and fines, carry out justice in the king's cause, punish criminals, and raise soldiers for the army whenever they were needed. A lot of the sheriffs continued to be English until the rebellions that happened between 1067 and 71. They were slowly replaced by Normans. The textbook makes a horrendous joke. You might be interested in it. It says, one of the English sheriffs was called Toffy, T-O-F-I, in Somerset. I wonder if he came to a sticky end. So there we are. Any top tips for answering the questions? Yeah, this is going to be the last bit now because everybody's got Blue Planet to watch. Lanfranc, that's a big question. Oh, was feudalism more effective? Questions coming thick and fast here now. So tips for answering the questions. Well, we met the examiner last week, Mrs. McFarlane did, and the absolute key thing that the examiner said, well, first of all, they said that the way we've been teaching to answer questions is right, so we were quite pleased with that. On this paper, one of the other papers that we've not taught you yet, there's a few adjustments to make, but on this one we've been doing it right. So having 3 factors to talk about. They didn't specifically say to write in 3 paragraphs, but why would you not if you've got 3 different factors to write about? If you're struggling for time, of course, like in the 12-mark question, so you'll have a 4-mark question, a 12-mark, and a 16-mark, but you've got a choice of 2 for your 16-mark question. For your 12-mark question, I would recommend, whoops, that's me alarm. I would recommend for the 12-mark question so it'll ask you a question, explain why something. I'd have 1 factor and then a second paragraph. Leave it at that because you can still get decent marks, 8, 9 out of 12. Then do your 16 marker and come back to the 12. Because it's called 16 mark, but actually it's 20 marks really because your spelling, punctuation and grammar matter. So do your 12 mark. Don't spend very long on the 4-mark question. You can do that in 4 sentences. All you have to do, according to the mark scheme, is do 2 features or 2 points and 2 supporting bits of detail to go with them. So you can literally do 4 sentences and get 4 marks. And you don't need to spend ages on that. It's only 4 marks. Then do 2 paragraphs for your 12 marker. Leave a gap. Spend the most of your time on your 16 marker crafting an answer. Now the big tip from the exam board is focusing on the question. My big tip is to highlight the keywords in the question before you start. Just sit and think, what are the keywords here? And just you bombard your answer full of those keywords over and over again. And make sure you have a firm argument. Have a main reason. So yeah, paragraphs, you have to have structure. Have different factors in 3 paragraphs. For a 16 mark, you have an intro and a conclusion. And the intro just has to be 1 sentence. This is the main reason. But in your 16 marker, it'll usually have a stem. So it might be, it's not going to be this because I've given you that hint on here already, but it might be the main reason William won the Battle of Hastings was luck. How far do you agree? Good idea, if that was the case, would be to do luck in the first paragraph. And then in your second and third paragraphs to point back to luck and say how those factors, your next paragraph might be William's great generalship, and you, at the end of that paragraph, or somewhere in that paragraph, but ideally at the end, you refer back to luck and say, well, this factor was important and more important than luck because, or less important than luck because. But when you're doing your intro, it's just 1 sentence, luck was the main reason. Your conclusion, you've got to explain it a little bit more and support your conclusion, because that's the other thing. They said focus on the question and make sure conclusions are really firm, really well explained, and supported with at least some key evidence from your overall argument. Like a lawyer, at the end, they sort of sum up and then they go, I rest my case, and they sit down. It's not I think. You're saying it was this. You're being as sure as possible. Be argumentative. I teach the 6th formers, I tell them you've got to be arrogant in your answers. So be arrogant in your answer. So yeah, there's some tips on answering the questions. Feudalism more effective? It's really difficult to know whether feudalism was more effective than the Anglo-Saxon social structure. You're not really going to be asked it. Personally, and this might get confusing for you because you're taught to do the differences between those. If I was teaching you at A-level, I don't think there's a massive difference in the social structure. I think William kind of inherited something that was going on and made a few adjustments. Because you think, well, one of the big advantages of feudalism is you could get a load of soldiers without having to pay for them because they owe you 40 days service. But if you think of 1066, so did Harold Godwinson. Harold Godwinson had the Fyrd and the Huscarls. You have to pay for them. I'm coming back to Lanfranc. I'm coming to that now. So Lanfranc was the Archbishop of Canterbury. And the Archbishop of Canterbury was, in 1066, at the point where the Normans invaded, was the most powerful position you could have if you were part of the church. Well, actually, it was joint most powerful, along with Archbishop of York. So there was 2 sort of vying for the most powerful, one in the north, one in the south. Archbishop of York, Archbishop of Canterbury. When William took over, there was an Archbishop of Canterbury called Archbishop Stigand. And the Pope didn't approve of him, mainly because he was Archbishop of Canterbury and Bishop of Winchester at the same time. And you weren't allowed to be in control of 2 things. It was known as pluralism. And you weren't allowed, the Pope didn't approve of pluralism. So in 1070, 4 years after the conquest, William's got his feet under the table. He's feeling a bit more secure. He doesn't need an English Archbishop of Canterbury, maybe anymore. Maybe he had him for those 4 years, even though the Pope didn't approve, just because it's useful to have an Englishman on your side. And Stigand was actually the first important Englishman to submit to William. 1070, Stigand was out, Lanfranc was in. And Lanfranc made a lot of changes to the church. He made it illegal to do pluralism, to control 2 places at once. There's all sorts, it's on my Quizlet. Nepotism, so you can't have your son inherit church positions, simony, selling church positions, and there's marriage of priests. Yeah, so priests weren't allowed to get married anymore. He also made sure there were more regular meetings of the church bishops, and made sure that all the Norman customs for worship were brought into the English church, and he also acted as regent when William was out of the country sometimes, and it helped Bishop Odo to defeat the to defeat the rebellion of the Elves. Ernst Röhm, I think, was a Nazi. If I remember rightly, was he the guy in charge of Auschwitz? Let's look. I don't know. He was just one of the Night of the Long Knives. Yeah. Why are you asking me about that? Are you doing a different? Are you from Rosset? Yeah. Ernst Röhm was a Nazi that Hitler didn't. Well, he was a rival for Hitler's power, so Hitler had him bumped off on the Night of the Long Knives. But why are you asking me that? I'd be interested to find out. So that's about it then. 41 minutes worth. It'll automatically save, so if you want to go back and listen to any more. Last tip, if you're going to do any more preparing tonight, in form time, my big tip, as soon as you get to school tomorrow, get doing that Quizlet. Oh, you're doing Weimar German. So you are from a different school, are you? Alright, okay. Yeah, get yourself on the Quizlet first thing in the morning, because that's something you can just do. You can quiz each other on the Quizlet, in fact. You could sit with somebody else if you're not sure. And tonight, I would look at the questions, because I've told you the big questions after 1066, when William took charge, and then when William died. So have a look on the History Department website, on the page that I'll put a link to now, and go through those questions that are on there, because what I've put on Essentials on the website is every available example question for the unit on Anglo-Saxon and Normans. So what's it, about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about eight documents down. Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Matthew. So about eight documents down. Get on there, have a little look, see what's what. Hey, that's all right. TNZXL. Any amount of help it can be. That's all right by me. So if you're doing Crime and Punishment, next Sunday I'll be doing that with the Year 11s. So that's all from me. House of Godwins, I've got to go. They're not on the mock exam tomorrow, so don't worry about the House of Godwins. There you go. That's all you need to know. See you tomorrow, hopefully. I've been not so well today. I've been in bed. I'm feeling a bit better now. Hopefully I'll feel alright in the morning to be able to come into school. But either way, you'll be sat in silence doing an assessment for a good chunk of it. But see you later. Bye.